Alright, the time has come. Let's talk about Daredevil Born Again. So Daredevil Born Again is a new Daredevil show on Disney Plus, and this is basically the continuation of the Netflix show. Basically, you can call this the fourth season of the Netflix show. But it does have some differences in some territories, but also kind of stays faithful to the story that came before it. Now, let's back down a little bit. Let's break down my relationship with the character of Daredevil. Well, I didn't know much about him until I watched this series, and after watching it, this show made me a fan of Daredevil because I was very intrigued of his character, both the Matt Murdock side and the Daredevil side. As I was watching this show, I also went back on the Netflix show because I've never even watched that, and comparing it side by side, well, there is some territories where the Netflix show did it better. For instance, the action sequences. But that is the topic for later on. For now, let's talk about Born Again. So Born Again is basically structured as a 9-episode series, right? The first 3 episodes focus on the Matt Murdock side, particularly with the trial of Hector Ayala, aka White Tiger. Well, I found this portion of the show quite enjoyable, because you only get to see Daredevil once in the first episode during 3 of these episodes. And for me, it was fine, because the first time Daredevil shows up in the pilot episode of this show, it was a bang, guys. It was the fight between him and Bullseye, the fight to the death. And the ending of that fight, where Matt Murdock throws him off down the roof, really makes this particular fight scene stand out. But as I mentioned before, episode 2 and episode 3 basically focuses on the Matt Murdock side of things, and that is the trial of Hector Ayala, aka White Tiger. I really enjoyed it to see Matt Murdock being the best lawyer, being the greatest lawyer that he is, and I really enjoy these legal procedural portions of the show. That being said, when you get into episode 4 and you meet the Punisher, and also the Kingpin side of things starts to move on, because you have to remember, in this show, Kingpin is already mayor, so he's making moves, developing a task force for vigilantes and all that stuff. But when you get to episode 4 with Frank Castle finally meeting Matt Murdock for all these years, for the first time within years, that was an emotional sequence. That was an emotional scene, a heart-to-heart talk between the Punisher and Matt Murdock. I really enjoyed that scene, okay? But there is a problem with episode 4. In episode 4, in the end of episode 4, they tease us with finally Matt Murdock picking up his billy clubs and training as Daredevil. But when you get into episode 5, the episode has nothing to do with everything that happened in episode 4. And it kind of broke the momentum for me, because episode 5 felt like a standalone episode. It was about a bank robbery, and also it is purely Matt Murdock, not Daredevil. Well, there is one fight scene that happens in episode 5 that is quite intriguing, particularly that leg snap that caught me by surprise, It was a really good fight. But, as I mentioned before, you broke the momentum, alright? You teased us with Matt trying to beat Daredevil again in episode 4. But by the end of episode 5, he is still not Daredevil. And also, my biggest complaint with the first chunk of the show is the Hector Ayala, alright? He is supposed to be White Tiger, right? That's fine, but his ending, his arc in the story doesn't really feel impactful, because yes, it is a catalyst for Matt to eventually return as Daredevil. And if you saw episode 3, White Tiger is killed in the end by a corrupt cop, and I kind of wish they included one fight scene with White Tiger with all of his powers. Fine, if it ends with him dying, it's okay, but at least show us what the White Tiger can do to defend himself. So at least include one fight scene with him in his full costume, in his full glory, with all of his powers, fighting this one corrupt cop. That is my biggest complaint with the first chunk of the show. Now, after episode 6, they started introducing us to Muse, this gruesome serial killer. Now this, for me, this was the weakest part of the show, the weakest episodes of the show, because they have been showing Muse right after the first episode, right? And what I mean by showing Muse, well, it's just in a couple of short little scenes with him capturing his victims, but the show didn't build him up as a character. The show didn't really show us what he can do with all of these victims, his torture methods. They really didn't show us anything about Muse. And that is a big problem for the character, because if you have read the comics, Muse is Vincent Van Gogh. That is his name, alright? And he is very sadistic. And I would have liked to have seen one specific sequence involving Muse torturing his victims, just to show us how twisted he is. Well, sadly, the show didn't give us any of that. But when Muse shows up in the end of episode 6, that is also the final catalyst for Matt Murdock to become Daredevil. When he eventually does become Daredevil again, he beats up Muse like he was nothing, alright? And I really enjoyed that fight. The part where he is trying to strangle Muse with his billy club, that was so brilliant. But here's the thing, the fight was cool, but I didn't like the way Muse was used in this narrative, because in episode 7, Daredevil fights Muse again, right? Where he is trying to kill Heather Glenn, Matt's girlfriend. The second fight was short, and it ends up with Heather Glenn killing Muse. And I kind of wish that Muse was more powerful than that. He's a psychopath. He is a sadistic killer. So show us that, yes, the fight, particularly the first fight with Muse, was very bloody, and I kind of like it. The second fight with Muse, well, it's really not that good. Now here's the thing, Muse's whole arc in this show has been very rushed, and I know that he is returning for the second season of Born Again, and I really wish that in the second season focuses more on Muse as a character. Build him up, not just have him show up as Daredevil's punching bag, because he is Daredevil's punching bag in season 1. But I really do hope that's not the case with him appearing again in season 2, because he's a cool character and I find it that he is kind of wasted in this first season. Now, after episode 7, we start to get into the real meat of the show, because episode 8 and 9 revolves around the return of Bullseye and also Kingpin as a really strong mayor who is now fully embracing back his Kingpin persona, because in the earlier episodes he tries to play things clean, alright? But in the final 2 episodes he is fully on Kingpin mode. Now this has kind of been alluded in the previous episodes where Kingpin beats up Adam, but after that he slows down again. But in episode 8 and 9 he is fully embracing his persona as Kingpin again, and I really like it. Now, as I mentioned before, with episode 8 we focus on Bullseye, and yes, he does have a cool escape scene, and the sniper scene at the gala, it was pure perfection, and it shows how deadly Bullseye can be. Even without his costumes, even without his gears, he is Daredevil's enemy. He is Daredevil's #1 nemesis. And episode 9, well, in episode 9, all hell broke loose. Wilson Fisk fully emerging with his Kingpin persona, even snapping somebody's neck, even snapping somebody's jaw. That was really a gruesome scene to watch, but it is very in character for the Kingpin, and I was not expecting to see that in a Disney Plus show. Now, in episode 9, Daredevil also teams up with Punisher, and the fight sequences between them versus Fisk's anti-vigilante task force, that was brutal, that was gory, and that is the shit that I wanted to see in this show since the beginning, alright? And when that moment happens, it hits with a bang. So, as I mentioned before, when you compare this to the Netflix show, well, I can say this, the writing of the Netflix show is still peak. The action in the Netflix show were much grittier. But here's the thing, there is a plus in this Disney Plus show, in the Daredevil Born Again, and that is the increased budget. The increased budget made the action sequences far more enjoyable. What I mean by that is, during the action sequences, you can see Daredevil swinging through rooftops, doing parkours. He's basically more acrobatic in this one than he was in the Netflix show. And, well, overall, I am still happy with what I'm getting from this first season, even though it feels like you have already seen the first half of the story, and they are keeping the second half of the story in the second season. Well, this season ends up in a cliffhanger, but it really makes you wonder, because in the final moments of this first season, Daredevil tells Karen that he needs an army. We need an army to combat Fisk and his anti-vigilante task force, right? And your mind is racing. Who could it be? Could it be the Defenders or the Hand? Because if you have been keeping up with the set photos of season 2, he is wearing the Shadowland costume with the double D's and the black costume. And if you know the Shadowland storyline, well, in that storyline, Daredevil takes up control of the Hand, he brings it to the city, and he really becomes the more brutal version of himself. On the other hand, we have the Defenders possibility, which I kind of like it because we have never seen the Defenders again after 6 years, and it could be awesome just to see them fight alongside each other again with Jessica Jones, Luke Cage, Iron Fist, because two of these possibilities are the most likely. You can go with the Devil's Reign plotline where the Defenders are involved, or you can go with the route of the Hand, the Shadowland, the much more darker stories that can be explored in the second season. So, if you have seen Daredevil Born Again Season 1, what do you think of this season? Is the season as good as the Netflix show? Because I don't think it is, but it is really not bad. There are still some enjoyable elements. Punisher was great, Charlie Cox's performance as Daredevil and Vincent D'Onofrio as Kingpin are both really masterful. They really carry on the show with these two performances. For me myself though, I am really satisfied with this first season, and I'm really looking forward to the second season and also what happens next to Punisher in his own special. Well, what you guys think? If you have seen Daredevil Born Again, what do you think? Does this top the Netflix series? And what do you want to see happening on the second season? Which plotlines? Comment everything down below, and see you on the next video.